Hey you guys, thanks for tuning in to my channel. Go ahead and like and subscribe. Today we're going to talk about the 90s. All right, so as always, I'm going to walk you through how to get to the playlist because I'm not able to share the songs in this video without getting sued. So if you want to listen to the songs as we talk about them, just go to Angel of Discord on Spotify, which I'm doing right now on Google, but you can do it on your phone using the app, and you'll see that we've gotten to 1,000 plays on a few songs. Woo, woo, woo! Then we're going to go to Artist Playlists, and we're going to go down to Angel of Discord's Top Picks from the 90s, and we're going to see Hole and Nirvana and X Japan and Red Hot on the cover. And here we go. Let's kick it off. Right off the bat, let's just dive in, shall we? So we got Silent Jealousy by X Japan, revered by Kiss and Marilyn Manson and many other American artists, but a lot of people don't know them because they're in Japanese. But they are such a good metal band. They're like really dark, emotional, and theatrical even. Yoshiki on the drums, ba 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 ba. And this might be my all-time favorite song, Silent Jealousy. It's probably about Yoshiki's dad who killed himself. Yoshiki walked in when he was a kid and found his dad hanging when he was just a boy, like 4. Most of his music is about that experience. And then he lost Hide, the guitar player, also hung himself. And a lot of people in his life have committed suicide that get close to him. It's a beautiful piece, and you hear it starts with this amazing piano, classical intro. By the way, listen to the remasters that just came out. I believe they're even 2022 remasters. Holy shit, when that bass drops and the fucking drums come in and the guitars come in and they're panned. I've listened to the previous versions, which I already thought were great mixes from the 90s, like early 90s. But now, holy cow, it's just amazing. And the guitar solo where it goes from minor into major. Honestly, 5 of the greatest musicians that were on the planet at that time. And they just happened to be in a different country than America. No big surprise. There's most of the world's population isn't in America. There's amazing musicians out there making amazing music that isn't American. But one band that was American that was pretty fucking amazing was Hole and Nirvana. And I put Celebrity Skin above Lithium, which many people might freak out about. But it's kind of the song that hit me first. When I first heard Celebrity Skin as a kid, I was like, how did they do that? How did they get that sound? How did they do this? And Courtney Love was just such a punky figure that was just so, man. She's kind of like Johnny Rotten, except as a woman. She's talking about things that, we're talking the 90s, that hadn't been approached yet, especially things like self-esteem, celebrity culture, the farce of it all. That was really a great contribution to the conversation that was happening in music, about music. Lithium by Nirvana. It's the only one you could dance to. Getting the women dancing, and women were already a huge fan of Nirvana. They were a huge fan of Kurt's voice. You'd go to Pearl Jam and it was all guys. They were the Rolling Stones of that era. And then you'd go to Nirvana, it was all girls. They were the Beatles of that generation. They had some sort of like very sentimental and sweet and softness to them. And Lithium is also a great example of great lyric writing because you've got, same with All Apologies, Kurt used a lot of opposites. I find him to be one of those great poets, and that might be one of his best traits too. Even though he really diminished that about himself, I think he was, compared to the Bob Dylan of his generation, or even perhaps the Leonard Cohen, in my opinion. But he used a lot of lyrical tricks and lyricism that I think he maybe purposefully avoided touting. And Lithium has this really cool, statement, opposite statement. It's like, the day is done. Oh, man. But I'm having fun. Oh, what? And that keeps you intrigued, especially in pop music. And that's why it's brilliant, because it's not necessarily brilliant poetry, but it's brilliant lyrics. because as you go, you're like, oh, I know what he's talking about. Oh, wait, it got more complicated. I still think I know what he's talking about. He even talks about it and try to make them as conflicting as he could so that they would be intriguing. If anything, Kurt Cobain is the most mythologized character in rock and roll in terms of ethics, in my opinion, and my beliefs. I think Kurt's up there. Scar Tissue, Red Hot Chili Peppers, number 4. This doesn't feel like a 90s song. It feels like a 2000 song. And to be fair, it's the very end of the 90s. I know some people are going to say, what? It's not Under the Bridge, you know, but I think Scar Tissue is the preferable song. That song is amazing. The slide playing is beautiful. And I know that Anthony Kiedis is maybe some sort of a piece of shit. And I've heard that Flea is a saint. And I've heard that the guitar player is a narcissist. They come together. They jam. Know Your Enemy by Rage Against the Machine. I had this low on the list. And then as I was listening to the list today, I raised it up. We are at a pivotal point. And we're always in a pivotal point, right? Where our freedoms are being taken away by the rich elite. It's kind of funny how Tom Morello is so self-promoting by not promoting himself, by promoting Zach De La Rocha. But he said, and it might be true, Zach De La Rocha is the greatest frontman of all time. And when he lists the best Revolution songs of all time, he includes many Rage Against the Machine songs, his own band, in the list. You want to say, hey, that's fucking arrogant. But then you listen, and you're like, no, he's right. He's right, though. He is right, though. He is right. They literally had concerts canceled because they were too predicted to cause riots. That's how powerful they were live. And Know Your Enemy, to me, has that interesting turnabout. It's a little bit more classic rock than some of their other stuff that's metal. It's got Maynard is featured in the middle, which is awesome. It's a cool change of tone. The bass line, when it hits, it's just so like, boom, boom. The guitar solo is actually pretty cool too. I like that use of the octave pedal. There's just a lot going on in this song, and lyrically, it's fantastic. I like the end. He chants and incants at the end about the American dream and about how it is all the elite propaganda, and that the more that people tell you you're in the land of the free, then you know who is out to get you. And it's becoming more and more apparent now as everybody's kind of waking up to the hostility of this capitalist environment and the fact that, as we see on social media, that you're partying on your yacht and you're smoking your cigar, and then you're coming in and saying, I can't afford to give you your raise. We're starting to see the hypocrisy more and more. Follow your boss on Instagram. See what he's up to. Know who you're working for, because he doesn't want you to follow him on Instagram. The helicopter rides with $1,000 champagne bottles. Moving on, Brian Wilson. We've got from the Bare Naked Ladies, a band that most people don't realize that first album, Gordon, was actually so dark and dismal and profound and critically acclaimed by really high up music critics, because they all graduated from a pretty top music school in Canada. And they came out with Gordon right out of the gates. It's a witty song about music, about being depressed, and comparing it to, and I think every musician's been here, Brian Wilson laying in bed, listening to the Beatles and saying, fuck it. Just fuck it. There's no point. There's no point anymore. I give up. And it's got this cool spy theme coming out of this beautiful trance-like melody and fantastic lyrics. You can call me Pavlov's dog, ring a bell and I'll salivate. How do you like that? That's a good lyric. It is a high, high honor to have Bob Dylan, one of the greatest songwriters of all time, ask you if he can cover one of your songs. And Dave Grohl was lucky enough to be in that position when he wrote Everlong with the Foo Fighters. He apparently toured with that album, opening for Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan doesn't meet all of his openers, but Bob Dylan called for him. And he went and he met him in an abandoned shed or something like that. He walks in and Bob Dylan's in all black, standing as a silhouette. He's got a hat over his eyes and he just says, hey, you wrote that song Everlong? Dave's like, yeah. Super nervous. Bob Dylan says, you mind if I cover that? Dave's like, yeah, but that'd be awesome. You can cover it. Bob says, sweet, thanks. That's the end of it. It's something coming out of a lot of tragedy that just, I think, was apparently written straight from the heart, but it also feels so melodically fluid that there's no way it wasn't composed on some level. Speaking of waterfalls of emotion, you got Guns N' Roses' Estranged. Now, this song took me a long time to appreciate, and it climbs the list the longer I listen to it, because the more you learn about the song. When I first ever heard it, I was in a fucking big-ass, black, fucking massive lifted truck. Brand new. It was 2011. Josh Nordland was at the wheel, who you should check out. And he was driving, and we were going to go practice, and he was like in this stoner metal band, and I'd been introduced through this connection that I had in the music stuff. And we were smoking tons of weed, and it was just billowing out of the car. And he said, there's only 2 good songs by Guns N' Roses, but they're 2 of the best. He put on Bitch, Back Off of Use Your Illusion 1. And he said, that's the only good song on that album. Besides, you know, Knocking on Heaven's Door. I was like, yeah, I know that. And then he pulled it out and he said, and on Use Your Illusion 2, Estranged. He put it on, and I remember the first time I heard it, I was like, this is kind of a jumble. On my 21st birthday, now off the rails, back in my drinking days, now straight edge, but I was blackout. And I got some mushrooms, and me and my buddies went and saw Guns N' Roses live. This girl came up to me before the show. It was just like, I know you. And she was all high too. And I was like, am I that high? Because we get in, and then it did feel like we were meant to be there. And Axl comes out. They opened the show with Estranged. And I was like, that's the only song I wanted to hear tonight. And they opened with it. And Axl comes out, and he was like a shaman singing over a fire. Ended up like watching the music video while I was on acid, and realized that it's about his childhood. It is about Axl Rose dealing with the fact that he was raped as a child, and dealing with the pedophilia that took place from his uncle on him. And you see him in the therapy room, and he's actually astral projecting, because there's some truth to that. The dissociation is close to astral projecting. So when you have all that trauma, it's not unlikely that he actually ended up learning some sort of psychic ability. I know that sounds crazy, but that's what the song's about. And it's about becoming estranged from your body, estranged and dissociated, which is so pertinent right now in mental health. Beautiful. Estranged from the family, estranged from himself even, estranged from his body, totally estranged and on your own. And it's such a dark, beautiful song. As somebody who does dissociate, I think it's one of the best pictures that art has ever made of what dissociation is. I remember being stoned out of my mind in high school in my brother's car. And we were driving to play Falf. And my brother was already a little scary. You know, he's edgy and dark. And so I was already always nervous around him because he's bigger, he beat me up, and now we're getting high together, and I always wanted to impress him, and there was this weird combination of things that really made it stressful. And it's the only time I've ever been scared of music. That's something that 9 Inch Nails can do, that Trent Reznor can do, is capture that kind of torment and angst that's actually fucking viral. But then he adds a dance beat to it, and you start to actually be like, whoa. And I remember just shaking in the car, and my brother saying, accept it, accept the dark, just accept it. And just being like, ah. It wasn't until years later that I fell in love with some of his poppier songs as well, like Head Like a Hole. And that's the next song on the list, because just like Rage Against the Machine, great song about what's going on today, politically, economically. Black is your soul, I'd rather die. That kind of sums it up. That's about how I feel about the fucking planet these days. About being watched, being on camera, having the fucking elite rule every aspect of your life. Isn't that how it feels? Nothing. Now going to a much calmer tone. Nothing of the Kind by Jimmie Gilmore is probably one of the most romantic songs I've ever heard in my life. Coming out of a 90s country artist who is, yes, Smokey, the character Smokey in the movie The Big Lebowski. That's Jimmie Gilmore. He is an old, stony, chill, Native American country music artist. And if you've ever heard so many juxtapositions in one place, then you're going to fall in love with the culty country music of Jimmie Gilmore that I grew up on because my mom was a huge fan. And in the final line, he says, "There's more to your tears than there will ever be to mine." I mean, that song is profound. That album, by the way, I mean, it hits me in the heart because I've heard it since I was in the womb. The Mango Song by Fish. Now, if you're talking about a song that I would show pretty much anybody who's getting into Fish, I would say the Mango Song, because it's happy, it's upbeat, it's jazzy, it's somewhat familiar, but it's still quirky in a way that I think if you're gonna get into Fish, you're gonna love. The 90s, man, I associate it so much to drugs, right? I'd go out and I was like searching for my sound as a musician so hard. And I still remember I was walking the streets and I was like, what is my sound, God? And this guy came up to me, a homeless man, and he said, I see it. I see it. It's Metallica meets Fish. It's the best of the stadium bands and the best of the festival bands. You're gonna make it happen, man. And I said, whoa, that guy is intense. But I was like, that's kind of exactly what I needed to hear. So I went down and I bought a picture of Nectar. If you're getting into Fish, I can't think of a better song to put on. He with Spread Beaver. Now, this is one of my favorite bands of all time, but they don't have all of his albums on Spotify. Unfortunately, they just have one album, and it's 4 live songs from his last record right before he died. And that's great. That's fine. It's whatever. I gotta say, it's not my favorite record, and this isn't my favorite song. Otherwise, if I was able to put Lemoned Ice Cream by Hide, spelled Hyde, Matsumoto, if I was able to put that song, it would be possibly #1. But this one is Pink Spider by Hide with Spread Beaver. What a great band name, by the way. And it's great. It's cool. It's got a little bit of a psychedelic, modern punk sound that was kind of going on in the 90s. It's not nearly as revolutionary to me as a lot of the other work that he did. And it is a live recording, but it's all they've got on Spotify. And even so, it makes it that high on the list, above even the Misfits' Last Caress. The 90s, like the 70s, was a frustrating list to make because there's so many good songs coming out. Last Caress off Static Age was quite a bomb. And it's super funny because for me, when I first got it was in high school. One of the first bands I ever got into. My buddy Sky gave me a CD with Nirvana and a bunch of other artists, and Misfits were on there. And I remember listening, and I was like, oh, this is very pretty, you know, and I drummed to it, and I never paid attention to the lyrics. It's many years later I realized, what is he saying? Learning to Fly by Tom Petty. I think Tom Petty is on pretty much every era. I think he's on my 60s, my 70s, my 80s, my 90s. It's got that cool guitar sound. I still don't know how he did that. If that's a 12-string panned, I'm not entirely sure, but it's so hypnotic. And he's just one of those artists that you listen to one song and you say, well, that was pretty good. Then you listen to the next thing and you say, well, that was pretty good. And the next thing you say, that was pretty good. But you'll only hear a few that blow your mind. But you'll start to really respect Tom Petty once you realize that none disappoint you. And all of them are pretty fucking good. One by U2. This is another song that's revolutionary in a very different kind of way that still we all need to hear. In some ways, I think some of us have heard it almost too well now. We've got so many PC police people looking out. But we've also got so many people that aren't realizing how interconnected we are. And this song is about that. We are one, but we're not the same. We have to carry each other. I think Johnny Cash covered it really well too, if you ever want to check that out. Nutshell by Alice in Chains. I mean, it is It's got to be one of the most depressing songs ever written. And that chord progression is so resolute. It's so sad, but also so like, boom, this is how it is. It's a beautiful chord progression, beautiful melody. Story of my life. Now, when I was first ever playing Guitar Hero, I remember there was only one song I would go back to play, just to listen to it. Even though it was way too easy at that point in the game, right? I'd go back and I'd be like, I just want to hear that song so I can just space out and listen to the lyrics because it's so funny. As I've gotten older, it's summing up some of my later life experience. And so it's a song that aged with me. And I think that's really good songwriting. Burnout by Green Day. This is the song that kicks off Dookie. And a lot of people will say Dookie or American Idiot. And I kind of think American Idiot. But I like Dookie. I want Dookie to win. I want it to be Dookie. Because there's that stage in your life. He was basically like a sexy version of Johnny Rotten. That still had that kind of comical, fuck you. Mutilated Lips by Ween. One of the producers that I met, one of the managers that I met when I was young that got me hooked up with a lot of music connections and really promoted me and got me into music. And the reason that I'm still making music today and the reason I run this music studio and I do what I do, we were walking through the university and he just kind of, I was like probably 14 and he pointed, no, I was maybe a little older, maybe 15, 16. He pointed at this poster that said, Ween. And he said, who the hell is that? And it just was this crazy psychedelic art. And I was like, I have no idea. And he said, you should find out. It wasn't until later that I started constantly being compared to Ween. Having never listened to them. Having had people suggest them to me like that important in my life. I'd never listened to them. And now when I listen to it, I'm like, oh, damn, okay, that's pretty sick. I'm glad to be compared to that. I still don't ever listen to it. But they are really tied to Zappa. So it all comes full circle, doesn't it? And those psychedelic effects, that is something I've always strived for.
Baby?
Hey, Kels. We're going to take a little pause here. My fiance just got home. Then we will continue with our best of the 90s. And we're back. It's another day, but you know what I love about 90s songs? I keep getting older, but they keep staying the same song. The list of the top 90s songs, and we're back at it. And this guy is a crazy hillbilly meth head who learned to fucking shred the bass so hard that Metallica said, you're too crazy for us. We can now work with you. And he said, ba-da-ba-dum, Sergeant Baker, ba-dum-ba-dum. And that's who we're talking about. We're talking about Les Claypool. We're talking about Primus. We're talking about some of the best bass lines, some of the weirdest shit that ever came out. And another band tied back to, drum roll please, Zappa. So as you can see, there's a common theme here. A lot of these 90s alternative bands actually were tying back to Zappa. And what we can see is we've got Ween, we got Primus, we got a lot of bands looking up to the king of alternative rock. I mean, honestly, I think Zappa was very 90s in the sense that he was sardonic, he was weird, and he was like, you know what, if you don't like it, fuck you. And also, hey, government, I know what you're up to. And that was very much the 90s, you know? And that was very much Primus. Sergeant Baker is my name. I'm here to show you how to play the game, boy. One thing that I know about Primus here in Missoula is that we have beer called Fish On, and that he's a big friend and fan of the Kettle House Brewing Company, and that they're good friends with him. And so shout out to that. Shout out to a local kind of business owner being able to make friends with a rock star. Seems like he's a pretty down-to-earth guy. And that was another thing that was cool about the 90s, right? A lot of down-to-earth people. So next we've got y'all know who that is. You've all heard that joke too many times. And it's Not fair, because actually Eddie Vedder is a great singer. One of my first girlfriends, and she's just like, he sounds like such a guy, you know? He just sounds like a guy, you know, like a dude. You know, these Leo frontmen, you know, whether it's Mick Jagger or Robert Plant, hey, J-Lo, or fucking Eddie Vedder. These Leo frontmen, what they do that's so cool is just such unique delivery. It's just sounds. They're just like moaning or shrieking or yelling or something, and it's just really creative. That kind of frontman that I think is just tremendously interesting. And Eddie Vedder was no different, using the voice as an instrument to tell a kind of melodic line rather than words. And I really like that, especially the improv live. And I gotta say, I'm not the biggest Pearl Jam fan on the planet, besides 10. And I got 10 and I was like, this is an amazing album. And then I got a little older and I listened to some more of their stuff and I was like, whoa, this is like a different band. That album is like a different band. It's kind of weird how much they went acoustic folk pop. Yeah. I'm a big fan of grunge, and I'm a big fan of that era of Pearl Jam. It was almost like a Led Zeppelin kind of grunge thing. And after that, I feel like their hard work kind of fell off, if I'm being honest. But that first album, man, you can hear that hunger. You can hear it. You can tell how hard they worked on that. And one thing that I love about it is the production. I love the way that on Eddie Vedder's vocals, it's so subtle, but like you can hear that they put echo on some parts. On other parts, they add a phaser. On other areas, they do this. And they're just having his voice kind of evolve very subtly with the mixing techniques they used throughout even a single song. And it's really subtle. It's really beautiful. And I mean, that has now become pretty norm in pop music to do intense vocal editing. I remember my first girlfriend was like, Stone Gossard is hot. And I remember her just being like, who? But he follows in the same line as that Keith Richards. Well, I guess it started with T-Bone Walker into Chuck Berry into Keith Richards into Joe Perry into Slash into Stone Gossard. They all kind of looked up to each other and they all kind of played the same sort of style across the board and across time. So it's kind of an interesting one. I think it's because it's fun, but it's also kind of ejaculatory. I was living at my dad's house. He was living with this kind of mentally ill guy who would walk in circles and listen to records over and over. He'd suffered from almost failed suicide, so he had brain damage, which was pretty intense. He taught me a lot about Pearl Jam, and one thing they taught me is that deep, talk about sexual. This song is totally, it's about doing it doggy style. That's why it says, she doesn't like the view. Into the bottom, into the bottom, into deep. Which once you know that, you start to realize the sense of humor that Pearl Jam had when they were making these songs was very similar to all those other bands that I listed. And they're very much in the same line of rock and roll. There's only one ska band that I like, and it's Less Than Jake. And maybe it's because my older brother, who's been incredibly successful, is named Jake. There's a lot going on in it, but it somehow melodically sticks together, which is what I think people love about ska anyway. But I just love this song too because it's about that political divide where there's so many people that will assume, based on how you look, your outlook on life, and they might be dead wrong. Especially at that time in the punk movement, there was a huge stereotype of drug use, and there was also the straight edge punk movement was still going strong. So I think a lot of people felt really misunderstood. And what rhymes with Less Than Jake is cake. So we're going to go the distance today. I know that was a stretch. As you can see, there's a theme here between Ween and Primus and even Pearl Jam and Less Than Jake of not taking yourself too seriously, you know? And so I kind of like that. And I like that about the 90s. Everything was kind of a joke, but kind of dead serious. And it was talking about really big topics, but it was also talking about them kind of lightly. And that was kind of cool. It's very wise to maneuver that way. Something that I think was lost in the indie movement, a movement that I somewhat detest. Partly because it was about, I mean, primarily, if you read the music history behind the indie movement, it was about taking a retaliatory stance to punk and saying that you wanted to be more mature, which to me reads as more pretentious. And it goes hand in hand, right? And by the time you're doing a collaboration album with Taylor Swift, are you really that underground anymore? There was a period of time where I was invited to go to a cake show. And I said, hell no, I don't want to see cake. But as I've gotten older, this song has come on the radio enough times that I'm like, this is awesome, dude. It's a total underdog anthem. Very theatrical and very goofy. And I'd imagine their live show's actually great, even though I've heard mixed reviews. I always think of some of my friends, and I feel like this is the sort of music that we might make if we all work together, you know? All right, so we're continuing on in a new room, just to change the atmosphere, on a different day, just to change the tone. And next, After the Distance by Cake, comes Bleeder by Alkaline Trio, a band you thought came out in the 2000s. What I love about Matt Skiba is his lyrics, especially. I think he has a way of being really pessimistic and funny, and it's part of the lore of pop punk. It's scummy. I think they were one of the most underrated of the pop punk groups, of the trios that were coming out at that time. And I think that there's a lot of fun to be had listening to some of those early EPs. Loop Pack, When I'm On to Mike. As you've noticed probably, there's not a huge amount of variety in genre. I'm kind of talking about my favorite as an artist that inspires me, right? But I still am inspired when I hear some really good hip-hop, and to me, Loop Pack was one of those ones where when I put that on, it has such a good beat and such a good flow and such an interesting lingo to it, you know, such an interesting, it's kind of hypnotic. Lightning Crashes by Live. This is a song that at times can almost bring you to tears. They may be a Christian band, but I don't think that stops anything, because I think that sometimes those people can be really spiritual and really in touch as well, and in a really pure kind of way. Pink Triangle by Weezer, off of their least favorite album, Pinkerton, that a lot of people really trashed when it first came out, which happens to a lot of great music, right? And Pink Triangle is about falling in love with a girl only to find out that she is batting for the other team, so to speak. And it's a really heartfelt song, and I remember when I first heard it, I thought it was really funny, and my ex-girlfriend slapped me, and she was like, I don't think it's funny, I think it's sad. There's many fish in the sea, in my opinion, but it's a beautiful song. That Beatlesy melody fused behind this kind of drug-fueled, distorted haze that creates this very strange atmosphere that still has this incredibly poppy sound, but it's very noisy. I think that they really, after their first album, were expected to come out with something much more pop accessible. I Think I'm Paranoid by Garbage. Their use of electronics alongside distorted guitars, I thought, was pretty progressive for the 90s. So much Nine Inch Nails-ish. Flagpole Sitter, Harvey Danger. Yes, it's because of Peep Show, yes. But because of Peep Show, I listened to the song and I really got into the lyrics, and my God, is it funny. Dragonaut by Sleep. The most overrated metal band of all time? No, I'm just playing. Dragonaut is great, but can you listen to all of Dope Smoker and enjoy it? Maybe you can. Maybe you can. I can listen to Dragonaut all day and enjoy it. That's all I got to say about that. Simple Song, Avail. And they're one of those skater punk kind of hardcore straight edge bands that did covers of fucking John Cougar Mellencamp, and they couldn't sing on pitch, and sometimes they really bombed it, but man, did they have heart. And Simple Song, I think, just really suits them, and it's really lyrically interesting. It's one of those songs where you can't quite tell what he's saying, but you still totally empathize with it. Souls of Black by Testament, because you love it when a guy sings like a vampire over the most crazy bass line you've ever heard, and you want to hear a thrash metal band that everybody is sleeping on. That's when you listen to Testament. They're awesome, though. They're awesome, man. And the crazy thing is, they've gotten even more badass in the recent years. Check out Brotherhood of the Snake. Cliffs of Dover, Eric Johnson. I don't know if anybody doesn't remember playing this on Guitar Hero. It's got to be the happiest lick of all time. It's just like a dopamine surge. When I listen to it, I look out over the Montana mountainscape, and I can hear the Cliffs of Dover echoing, and I hear it in my Irish soul. We've got Money Talks by AC/DC, because a chorus that says "Marry for the money" is probably about as punk as it gets, talking about how this woman has manipulated everyone in her life and that she is just this wicked bitch, basically, because AC/DC are some working class fellows from Australia. And I love it when they get a little bit political, like blood on the dollar, every last drop, you want blood. Well, you got it. Sometimes they can be snarky, and I like when they're snarky. I like when they say a little fuck you, you know? I like that. I think it looks good on AC/DC when they do that. Sister Luck by the Black Crowes, because 3 guitars in one band. Is this Iron Maiden? Hell no, it's a Southern rock power group. Fuck yeah! What are you talking about? That's insane. In the 90s? I thought, what is this, the Allman Brothers? No, it's the Black Crowes. I heard the singer's a dick, but I saw them live this year and they were pretty fucking cool. I gotta say, they put on a great show. They didn't need the lights. They didn't need the fucking cameras in action because everybody's moving and everybody's grooving and everybody's having a good time on stage. And they didn't need any other bullshit. And I thought that was pretty sweet. Asking some of these like young guitar players that were really shredders who I should be getting into, and they all said, the Black Crowes. Bad Fish, Sublime. I remember when I played this for my brother, I was in high school, and he said, you're listening to Sublime? How do you know about Sublime? And he was just like instantly like, are you high right now? Because that's what Sublime is, man. And it's kind of weird because it's become just frat boy music. Frat boy central, kind of. My phone died, but I think we left off at Bad Fish by Sublime. Just decided to move into my bed so I can just kind of lay back and get that chill 90s vibe, you know? Everybody was pretty laid back. It was a mellow time. Heroin was on the in, cocaine was on the out. Everybody was just sleepy boys. Freightliner by Hot Water Music. Now, this is a jam, you guys. I mean, honestly, if you haven't gotten into Hot Water Music, I don't blame you, because the guy is hit or miss to some degree. And, yeah, it all sounds a little bit the same at the end of the day. You can choose any song off that album, and it's hardcore screaming, but at the same time, very, very chill. That guitar line is so haunting and eerie. It just feels like something that echoes through your mind, you know? And just kind of is just, it just captures this really beautiful, childlike melancholy feeling. And I love that. I want to get a mohawk, but mom won't let me, so I might just run away. Because I am Davey Havoc in the 90s when AFI was a hardcore punk band. If you don't believe me, check it out. It's a hardcore punk band, man. Before they were emo, before Miss Murder. And those bass lines are fucking ripping. Blast from the East, Jeff Beck. He's a glorious artist that has aged very well with time. He's got different eras, and unfortunately some of the eras, like the 80s, are a little rough because of the singers he chose. But I love his instrumentals. And this one is a very oriental instrumental, done with a very clean tone. And it's really cool to hear those foreign scales shredding away like that. Lie to Me by Johnny Lang. Speaking of shredding away, we're going to talk about a blues legend here. And I got to actually meet him a couple times. And what really struck me about Johnny Lang was he's one of the only artists I've met. And I met him in Las Vegas. And I come all the way back to Missoula, Montana, and I'm waiting outside of the Wilma Theater. I don't even say it. He recognizes me. He remembers me. He tours with his wife and kids, all right? And he is a good Christian soul singer at the end of the day. And he adopted the blues, and he sings the blues with such soul. And Lie to Me is that kind of gospel soul blues that he was just made to sing that blues. I also like Paint It Black by him. Really good cover. I don't know who the singer of Veruca Salt is, but they did a duet with Skating Polly. And that's how I was introduced to them. It just sounds so sing-song poppy with this distortion. It's just a cool combination that was kind of happening in 90s alt-rock, but that one's my favorite. It took me a long time to get into Blink-182, even though I've even adopted their singing voice to some degree in some of my songs. But it took me a long time to get it. You know, there's a long time where I was like, I don't get it. It's too whiny, it's too blah, blah, blah. But once you get a little older, you start to be like, yeah, because that's how it is to be a teenager, you know? It is whiny, acne-filled, you know, punk rock and a destitute place, you know, smoking pot out of a fucking apple kind of situation, you know? Yeah, I guess this is growing up. Low by Cracker. This song makes you feel high. Vividly, when I first heard it, I was like, whoa. It gave me that same feeling of taking a hit of pot. I was just like, whoa, this is kind of spacing me out right now. It's making me feel a little out of body and a little bit like everything's a little brighter and I'm a little out of control, and it's kind of cool. I dig it. Blue on Black, Kenny Wayne Shepherd. Speaking of cool blues artists, just like Johnny Lang, love Kenny Wayne Shepherd. It's another artist I got to meet. Just kind of called me over and took me under his wing and like hell, you know, gave me a big hug. And I was like, you know, all nervous, you know, because I'm meeting all these artists, and a lot of them were, you know, somewhat off-putting or just kind of like Steve Vai kind of looked me up and down like, I don't know if this kid can really pull his weight, you know, but it was really cool to see like a Kenny Wayne Shepherd that kind of just pulls you in and gives you a hug and is just like, hey, man, one love. I remember being a skinny, scrawny kid that was just, it just gave me that vibe, you know, where it's just like you could tell that he looked at me and he was kind of like, yeah, man, I know the struggle, you know. It's not about anything but that. Such a good live performer. My God, the way he whips it behind his head and then he flings it between his legs and he's like, I mean, it's unforgettable. And it's so smooth. It's what I imagine Hendrix must have been like. Just sweeping movements where it's like his whole body was moving as one. And I was just like, dude, that's cool. Pretend We're Dead by L7. This is a cool band. One of my favorite artists who I mentioned earlier, Hide Matsumoto, before he had Spread Beaver, he would tour with L7 as his backing band. Pretty badass. And that song, Pretend We're Dead, is not only tongue-in-cheek in a way that I really like, that was very key to the 90s vibe. It has that almost electronic feel to it, where it's kind of dancey, but it's like sardonic in the lyrics, and it's just like, we pretend that we're dead. It's just like something really like weirdly childlike and innocent, but yet so dark about it that makes it just so real. Sex Laws by Beck. Beck was one of my favorite artists in high school. It was kind of hard to pick which one. You know, speaking of artists that are kind of alternative in that 90s vibe, you know, along with Primus and all those artists that we were just talking about, Ween. But for me, he's kind of lowered down a little bit, and I don't entirely even know why. Maybe it's because he fell off with his last few albums for me. But I love Sex Laws. It has like this James Brown on acid vibe. And I really dig that. I always thought they were random lyrics, but I recently was watching some interviews with Beck, and it turns out that he actually takes a lot of time on those lyrics. Shara Brock, The Smashing Pumpkins. That's such a good riff. They were so arty, and they were just so ahead of the curve, but right on the nose. And that's what made Smashing Pumpkins cool. Even though the guy was kind of a dick, as I understand it, he kind of screwed over his bandmates. And, you know, he got the punishment due, it seems like. He's definitely suffered a lot in his life, so I suppose he got what was coming to him. But that one song, Shara Brock, you know, Today, that's a good song. Zero, that's pretty good. Shara Brock, that's a banger. Copperhead Road, Steve Earle. Yeah, I can do country. You thought I was only going to put grunge on this list. Steve Earle was a very interesting cat. I put him up there with all the legends like Johnny Cash and all those guys, even though I guess he was a little later in the game to really hit it. Yeah, I don't think he even had a hit until the 2000s. But he was in it for a long time, and he caused some wreckage. We'll see it in the 2000s when his son, Justin Townes Earle, comes into the picture. One of his many estranged sons. Steve Earle's a character, but what I like about him is his self-proclaimed hill hippie nature. And there's something about that that reminds me of Kurt Cobain, even though I'm not sure anybody else sees that. I see that. I feel like there's probably a similarity to these crazy hillbillies coming down from the mountain with their distorted guitars to sing you a song, you know, while they travel on the road. There's something real sketchy and pirate-like about it that I like a lot. Even though I don't think I would ever approve of the way he actually lived his life. There's something I like about at least the idea of it. Pull Me Under, Dream Theater. It's as if we're back in the 80s, right, when we put on Dream Theater. And that's true with the next song, too. But Pull Me Under has this certain kind of dark quality to it where I can get past that 80s cheesiness just to enjoy John Petrucci shredding that guitar, you know, and those crazy synth lines in Pull Me Under set it apart from the other songs by the band. Acid Rain's good. Panic Attack is good. Pull Me Under is my favorite. I haven't listened to too much of it because some of it I find so cheesy it's unlistenable, if I'm being honest. More Than Words by Extreme. Speaking of cheesy, and probably you would think it came out in the 80s, they're overlooked because they were kind of like, they hit it a little too late and you thought they were an 80s band, and so they kind of just bombed. They were just too late to the game, but they were one of the best, actually. Because when you listen to songs like this, it shows not only that's a pretty beautiful acoustic song with really nice accentuated harmonies and acoustic guitar playing, nice finger-picking song. But on other songs, you hear them do the boogie-woogie in a way that I don't know if I've ever heard before. And there's some really cool stuff going on there, but it was too cheesy for the 90s. And I just thought I'd give them a shout-out at the end of the list there because I think they got kind of screwed, you know. They deserved something, and they got nothing. Anyways, that's my favorite songs of the 1990s. Thanks for watching. Rock on.